Rain turned the Brooklyn streets into slick black mirrors, each neon flicker from Rossi's deli bleeding across the pavement. My breath came in sharp bursts, the cold cutting deep. I just stepped from the car when the gunshot tore the night apart. A figure crumpled ahead. Tommy. My knees hit the asphalt before I could think, hands clutching his jacket, feeling the heat drain from his body. The copper smell of blood mixed with gasoline fumes. "Stay with me," I muttered, though I knew he wouldn't. Sirens wailed far off, but too far to matter. A crucifix slipped from his grip into my palm, slick with his blood. The Deli's sign buzzed and died, leaving only darkness and the distant hum of traffic. I felt eyes on me from the shadows watching. Then the car door slammed somewhere behind me and tires splashed through puddles, vanishing into the rain. This wasn't random, nothing ever is in this city. And as I rose, Tommy's last breath still in my ears, I knew this was the first move in a game I didn't choose, but couldn't walk away from. The funeral drew the kind of crowd where every handshake was a silent deal, every hug a test of loyalty. I kept my head down, eyes scanning for tells. The boss stood at the podium, voice warm, smile soft, talking about brotherhood like it was gospel. But every word felt like it was aimed at me, coated in sugar but hiding poison. Old crew members flanked the casket like sentries, their suits sharp, eyes sharper. When the service ended, people moved in tight clusters, whispers flowing like contraband. As I shook the boss's hand, he leaned close, his cologne thick, and pressed a folded note into my palm. "Meet me at the club. Midnight. No more, no less." His grip lingered, just enough to let me know this wasn't an invitation, it was an order. I slipped the note into my coat and walked out into the gray light, the crucifix heavy in my pocket. Midnight came with a bite in the air. The club's neon glowed red like an open wound, bass thumping beneath the hum of the street. Inside, cigarette smoke curled through low light, wrapping around whispers. I took the back booth, hands resting on the table, eyes on the door. The boss arrived alone, smile wide but empty, sliding in across from me. "You've been asking questions," he said, like it was a toast. I didn't answer. His gaze was steady, reading me like a ledger. He talked about loyalty, about family, about keeping trouble buried. Then, he leaned in. "Some stones aren't meant to be turned over, kid." I watched him leave, his shadow stretching longer than the man himself. I knew my questions had just become a problem. The next day brought whispers in the back rooms. "You're being watched," a bartender murmured as he slid me a drink I didn't order. On the street, faces turned away too quickly. Cars idled where they shouldn't. I caught a glint from a rooftop, maybe binoculars, maybe worse. Even the old-timers, the ones who'd taught me the ropes, spoke in half sentences. The city's rhythm had changed, slower, heavier, like it was holding its breath. Every step I took felt measured, each shadow a threat. The crucifix weighed on me, not just in my pocket, but in my gut. Whatever I'd stepped into, it was closing in. The crooked detective found me in a diner, the kind of place where the coffee's burnt and the blinds are always half closed. He slid into the booth like we'd planned it. "You want the truth," he said, lighting a cigarette. "It'll cost you." His eyes flicked to the crucifix on the table, then back to me. "Word is the boss didn't just sign off on the hit, he demanded it." My pulse slowed, the way it does before you throw a punch. "Why?" I asked. He grinned without humor. "Somebody was about to blow open a heroin pipeline worth millions. Can't have that, can we?" The smoke curled between us, carrying the stink of something bigger and far deadlier than I'd thought. Night washed the city in bruised violet as I traced Tommy's last footsteps to the docks. Salt wind cut through my coat, and the crucifix pressed against my ribs like a verdict. Cargo cranes hunched like iron vultures, their cables whining above the black water. I moved past a stack of pallets and found a smear of dried blood that rain had failed to erase. A stevedore watched me too long, then looked away like a man who had been warned. I asked for names and got prices instead. The boss liked it that way, truth franchised to the highest bidder. Hull cried, and the sound felt like it came from inside my chest. I remembered Tommy laughing on these planks when we were kids, boots thudding, dreams cheap and loud. You'd hate this, I said, and the wind threw my voice back. A van idled near the gate, windows fogged, patience coiled. I took out the crucifix and closed my fist until the edges bit. If fear had a shape, it would look like the water here, endless and without light. The club looked different when you arrived sober and left angrier. I slid into a shadowed corner and waited for the confidant who had once known my middle name before the world did. She came through the red haze like a promise that cost too much. "You're late," I said, and she smiled like it hurt. The bartender turned the music up to protect us from ourselves. She loomed close, and her perfume tried to drown the smoke. "The pipeline runs through the pier warehouses," she whispered. "Not the ones you know." I asked why she was helping, and saw the old wound flicker in her eyes. "Because he made me choose once," she said, and her hand trembled before it steadied. A bouncer stared too long, then spoke into his sleeve. I felt a wire tighten between the boss and this room. She pressed a matchbook into my palm with a number and a key. The city briefly held its breath, and then the bass kicked our hearts forward. I took the key to a rental lockup that smelled like wet cardboard and old secrets. The roll-up door clattered like bones, and the unit offered a map no one should own. Shipping manifests, cash slips, a ledger stamped with a shell company that wore a church's name. The boss never did, irony gently. I traced a route from Istanbul to Newark to the pier, following initials that matched ghosts I had served drinks with. "You wrote the last chapter too early, Tommy," I murmured. A floorboard creaked, and I turned fast enough to taste copper. The crooked detective stepped from the shadow with his hands displayed. "I'm not here to ruin your evening," he said, eyes like two torn tickets. He wanted proof to bury the boss or sell him back his soul. I offered a page and kept the rest, because trust is another word for leverage. "Careful," he said. "You're turning into him." I smiled without teeth, and locked the unit behind me. Word travels faster than truth, so I traveled faster than both. The matchbook number led to a payphone older than my sins. The confidant answered on the second ring, and told me I had 1 hour before the boss cleaned house. Rain began again with patient cruelty. I cut through a market alley where tarps snapped like flags of surrender. A kid hawked watches that could not keep time in this city. 2 men in matching suits stepped from a doorway and asked for a light they did not need. I gave them silence and a lesson in leaving me be. My knuckles sang, and the alley went quiet except for the rain. I knew I was burning bridges behind me, but bridges only matter to men who cross back. 1 hour, I said, and ran like a man who had already spent it. The warehouse wore darkness like bespoke armor. I slipped through a side door with the key biting my palm, and found the hum of refrigeration and the whisper of money. Crates stacked to the rafters carried fake labels that would fool no one who wanted to see. I wanted to see. Footsteps echoed and I froze behind a column, while the boss walked the catwalk with a smile that didn't reach the floor. He spoke to a lieutenant about schedules, about silence, about the ocean's forgiving mouth. Something in me shifted like ice cracking. "You could have called me family," I said under my breath. I captured photos, ledger shots, faces, the whole rotten orchard. When the lights flickered, I knew I had stayed too long in someone else's heartbeat. I fled with evidence pressed to my ribs and rage soldered to my bones. The city waited outside, wet and hungry. The photographs burned a hole in my pocket as I walked into the confidant's apartment, a place where the curtains were always drawn and the air smelled faintly of bourbon and distrust. She stood by the window, hair loose, eyes sharper than the glass between us. "You have something," she said, not as a question, but as a statement she already owned. I spread the shots across her table, each image a nail in the boss's coffin. She studied them without touching, like they were a snake that might still bite. "This will get you killed," she whispered. though her eyes said she wanted to see it happen. Outside, tires screeched and footsteps echoed up the stairwell. We both froze, her hand sliding into the drawer for a small pistol. "Window," she said. The crucifix swung against my chest as I crossed the room. "They're here for you," she added, voice almost tender. I didn't look back. In this city, tenderness was just a different brand of warning. I hit the fire escape just as the door below splintered. Cold night air wrapped around me, thick with the city's static. The metal stairs groaned under my boots, each clang a flare in the dark. 2 men spilled into the alley, guns drawn, scanning upward. I dropped low, shadows swallowing me as rain started again, light at first, then harder, turning the rusted steel slick. I moved fast, heart pacing the beat of the downpour, every step a prayer and a dare. One of them caught sight, muzzle flash painting the brick wall for an instant. I swung over the railing to the opposite fire escape, landing in a crouch that rattled bone. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, a false promise of rescue. By the time they reached the top landing, I was already 3 windows away, slipping into the darkness of an unlocked apartment, breath ragged, crucifix cold against my chest. The unlocked apartment belonged to nobody or everybody, peeling wallpaper, a single chair, and a smell of dust that outlived tenants. I pressed my back to the wall, listening for footsteps on the roof. None came. My hands shook less when they were busy, so I took the photographs out again, reviewing each face, each timestamp, each shipment code. The more I looked, the clearer the noose became, not just for the boss but for the men who kept his pulse steady. A floorboard creaked above. This time it wasn't them. The crooked detective dropped through the hatch like bad news. "You're making waves too big to swim," he said, brushing dust from his coat. I told him about the warehouse, the ledger, the pipeline. He offered a deal. Immunity for the boss if he gave up the bigger fish. "You really think I'm here to save him?" I asked. The detective grinned like he'd just remembered an old joke. We slipped out before dawn, the detective leading us through a back alley that reeked of old rain and bad decisions. He lit a cigarette with the kind of patience only liars have. "You're too close to this," he said. I told him closeness was the point. We moved past shuttered storefronts and trash fires, the city still sleeping or pretending to. He spoke of a meeting the boss had planned with his overseas partners, a place where the guards would be few and the stakes high. "It's your only shot," he said. I wondered if he meant my shot at justice or my shot at getting buried quietly. The crucifix dug into my collarbone as if to remind me whose side I was on. A garbage truck rumbled past, drowning the silence. When it faded, his voice came softer. "When the time comes, don't blink." In the neon-pink dawn, the air tasted like change, bitter, electric. The meeting spot was a forgotten hotel on the waterfront, its sign missing letters, windows boarded or broken. I scouted from across the street, rain dripping off my hat brim, watching shadows shift inside. A delivery truck pulled up, 2 men unloading crates marked with false export codes. The boss arrived minutes later, stepping from a black sedan with the easy grace of a man who believed in his own untouchability. I stayed in the rain, counting exits, guards, blind spots. A second-floor curtain twitched, the confidant's face for a heartbeat, then gone. My gut tightened. This wasn't just his meeting. This was a gathering of the Empire's bones. I gripped the crucifix and felt its edges carve into my palm. If I walked in, nothing would be the same. If I stayed out, nothing would change. The water behind the hotel slapped against the pier, impatient for the decision. The confidant's message was short. "Midnight. Pier 17. Bring proof." The wind on the waterfront cut like broken glass, and the fog hung low enough to muffle footsteps. I moved along the edge of the pier, the boards slick beneath my boots. Shadows shifted ahead, 2 guards in tailored coats, scanning the mist with dead eyes. The crucifix felt heavier tonight, as if it knew its time was coming. I spotted her near the far end, coat pulled tight, hair whipping in the wind. "You have it?" she asked without preamble. I handed her the envelope. She didn't open it. "This ends tonight," she said, glancing toward the warehouse lights glowing faint through the fog. A boat engine rumbled somewhere in the dark, and my pulse matched its rhythm. "You trust me?" I asked. She met my eyes, steady. "I trust you to do what you've already decided." We moved together through the fog, every step toward the warehouse feeling like a step into someone else's grave. The side door groaned as it opened, the stench of diesel and salt water clinging to the air. Inside, crates lined the walls like sentries, each marked with false origins. The confidant stayed close, her breath visible in the cold air. I scanned the catwalks above, empty for now. "He'll be here soon," she whispered. The hum of refrigeration units droned like a warning. I set up the camera on a crate, angling it toward the meeting table in the center. Evidence, not revenge, that's what I told myself. But revenge doesn't need reminding. A flicker of movement near the dock entrance pulled my attention. Footsteps echoed, measured, and confident. The game was finally moving to the last board. The boss stepped inside like he owned the air. Two men flanked him, their coats bulging where the metal slept. He smiled when he saw me, a warmth that could freeze water. "You've been busy," he said, stepping toward the table. I kept my hands loose, but my heart was coiled steel. "I know about the shipments," I said. His smile didn't fade. "You think that's news to me?" The confidant shifted, her eyes never leaving him. He set his gloves on the table, slow and deliberate. "You could have had a place beside me. Now you'll have nothing." The words were meant to gut me. Instead, they sharpened my aim. Somewhere above us, a camera lens blinked red, recording every syllable. The detective's voice cracked over a hidden earpiece in my pocket. "Got everything I need. Now, walk." But walking wasn't in me anymore. The boss leaned in, voice low. "You want to be a martyr? Fine. Just know no one remembers the names." My hand brushed the crucifix beneath my coat. "Some names get carved," I said. His brows knit for the first time, the smallest fracture in his stone face. The confidant's fingers twitched toward her coat pocket. The guards shifted, unsure if they should draw or wait for his nod. Outside, the boat engine roared louder, like the tide itself was coming for him. Every second was a coin flipping between survival and burial. The first gunshot wasn't mine. The confidant's pistol barked once, sending the nearer guard crashing into crates. Chaos bloomed. The second guard drew, but I was faster, my shot punching him back into the fog. The boss didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for his coat pocket, slow and deliberate. "Don't," I warned, but my voice was just air. The crucifix hung cold against my palm as I leveled the gun. He smiled, almost proud, as if I had finally earned the family's true inheritance. Another engine roared outside, closer now, headlights spilling into the warehouse like dawn. His last words were lost under the thunder of the final shot. When the echo died, the only sound was the sea. By dawn, the warehouse smelled of cordite and salt. The boss's body lay where it had fallen, his blood pooling into the grooves between the planks. The confidant and I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that wasn't already in the air. We dragged the crates into the light, photographing every label, every forged seal. Somewhere outside, a gull screamed, and it sounded like victory choking on its own blood. My hands shook as I packed the evidence into duffel bags, not from fear but from the weight of what came next. Power doesn't vanish when a man dies. It scatters, sharp as glass. "They'll be coming," she said quietly. I nodded. "Let them." The crucifix hung heavy against my chest, and for the first time, it felt less like a relic and more like a blade. The detective met us 2 piers over, his eyes scanning the bags like a jeweler weighing diamonds. "You're either the bravest man I know, or the dumbest," he said, lighting a cigarette. I handed him the photos, the manifests, the recordings. He flipped through them, the smirk fading into something colder. "This buries half the city," he murmured. The confidant leaned against a piling, her gaze locked on the fog rolling over the water. I asked him what came next, but he didn't answer. Not directly. Next, he said, you find out how many knives fit in your back before you stop counting. He walked away with the evidence, his coat whipping in the wind. I watched him go, knowing that the moment the sun was high, the streets would belong to the hungriest men left standing. By midday, the city's heartbeat was faster. Word of the boss's death spread through bars, back rooms, and butcher shops. Faces I'd known for years turned away when I passed, their eyes weighing the odds of my survival. I walked into Rossi's deli, the same one where Tommy had died, and the air shifted. Old man Rossi handed me a coffee without asking, the cup warm in my hands against the chill in my bones. Bad week, he muttered, as if that covered it. Through the smeared glass, I saw two black sedans roll past slow, like sharks circling. The confidant slid into the booth across from me, placing her hand over mine for just a second. Oh, they'll want the crown, she said. I looked out at the street, the sedans turning the corner, and thought about how heavy crowns really were. By nightfall, the calls started, coded warnings, threats dressed as advice, offers laced with poison. Every faction left standing wanted a piece of the empire, and they all wanted me to hand it over or be buried under it. I stood in my apartment, the city's lights blinking like 1,000 unblinking eyes. The crucifix lay on the table beside my pistol, both glinting in the lamplight. The confidant paced the small space, her boots ticking against the floor. If you pick a side, you lose, she said. I loaded the pistol slowly, the sound loud in the silence. Then I'll stand alone, I replied. Outside, tires screeched, too close. I blew out the lamp, letting the shadows swallow us whole. The next chapter was coming, whether I opened the door or not. The first knock was polite. The second rattled the frame. I opened the door with the pistol, low but ready. 3 men in suits stood there, their smiles painted on, their eyes cold. We can make this easy, the tallest said. You hand over the files, we let you walk. I stepped aside just enough for the confidant to appear in the hallway behind me, her pistol raised. The tallest man's smile faltered. Or, I said, we can do it my way. The silence stretched until it snapped, and they turned without a word, their footsteps retreating down the stairwell. When the door closed, I leaned against it, listening to the quiet return like a tide. The city outside still pulsed, hungry for what came next. I knew then, the fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The city erupted in whispers and gunfire. Every corner was contested ground, every shadow a possibility of death. I met the confidant in a backroom pool hall, the felt on the tables torn and the air thick with cigarette smoke. She poured 2 drinks without asking. 3 crews are making moves tonight, she said. One of them wants you dead before sunrise. I leaned back, letting the noise from the main room bleed in. Laughter too loud, clinks of glasses hiding tension. Then I'll have to disappoint them, I replied. The crucifix tapped against the glass as I drank, each clink a reminder of why I couldn't walk away. Outside, tires squealed, followed by a distant scream. This wasn't a war anymore, it was a feeding frenzy. By the time we hit the street, the night smelled of gasoline and cordite. Corner store burned 2 blocks away, its windows shattering from the heat. Men in dark coats ran past carrying rifles, their boots splashing through rainwater pooled in potholes. The confidant and I kept to the alleys, the city's arteries now pumping only fear. We can't just react, she said. We need to take a piece. Her words tasted dangerous, but so did standing still. A shot rang out nearby, sharp and close, and we ducked behind a dumpster. I gripped the crucifix, my fingers slick with rain. Then we move first, I said, and we slipped deeper into the maze. We struck first at a gambling den, run by one of the boss's old lieutenants. The front was a bar, quiet and empty, but the back was thick with smoke and money. I walked in like I belonged, the confidant at my shoulder. Heads turned, cards froze mid-deal. We're not here for a game, I said, my voice cutting the air. The lieutenant, a thick-set man with a scar across his chin, rose slowly, his eyes hard. Then you'd better have a good reason to still be breathing. I tossed the photographs onto the table. His men leaned in, their faces shifting as they saw what they were worth. This is your way out, I said. Or your ticket to the bottom of the river. Silence hung like a blade. The lieutenant didn't take the deal. He took the first swing. The room exploded into motion, chairs scraping, glasses shattering. I caught him across the jaw, the sound sharp against the backdrop of chaos. The confidant dropped one of his men with a single clean shot, sending the rest diving for cover. Cards and chips scattered across the floor like confetti at a funeral. I grabbed the lieutenant by the collar, slamming him against the wall. You think I'm afraid to finish what I started? I growled. His eyes told me he believed it now. Sirens wailed in the distance, but none of us planned to wait for them. We left him bleeding and conscious, a reminder that fear works best when it's breathing. By midnight, the city felt like it was holding its breath. Every crew was counting bodies, counting bullets, counting favors owed. The confidant and I holed up in an old tenement on the edge of Red Hook, the plaster cracked and the windows rattling from the wind. We spread out maps, marking the places we'd hit and the ones we'd take next. You realize this ends with one of us gone, she said, her tone almost casual. I didn't answer. Outside, a siren wailed once, then faded. I reached for the crucifix, feeling the weight of every move left on the board. Then we make sure it's not tonight, I said. And the storm outside seemed to agree, rattling the building like it wanted in. The night of the final play came heavy with fog, the kind that swallows gunfire. The confidant and I moved through the docks like ghosts, our boots silent on the slick planks. Every crew had gathered, their leaders tucked inside a warehouse whose lights bled into the mist. Once we go in, there's no walking it back, she said, her voice low but steady. I touched the crucifix beneath my coat, feeling its cold weight against my skin. We were never walking back, I replied. From the shadows, I spotted the crooked detective leaning against a piling, smoking like it was his last pack. He gave a nod, whether of warning or blessing I couldn't tell. The tide lapped at the pylons below, impatient for what was coming. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and heat. The lieutenants sat around a long table, the weight of their silence heavier than the crates stacked against the walls. The confidant slid into a corner, her eyes scanning every face. I stepped forward, laying the photographs, ledgers and recordings in the center of the table. This is your empire, I said. Rotten to the bone. Murmurs broke out, some angry, some fearful. One man reached for his pistol, but another grabbed his arm. The crooked detective appeared in the doorway, badge in one hand, shotgun in the other. Time's up, he said, and the tension in the room snapped like old rope. The first shot came from the far end of the table. Chaos tore the room apart. Chairs overturned, men dove for cover, and the air filled with the sharp bite of gunpowder. The confidant dropped behind a crate, returning fire with measured precision. I moved toward the head of the table, the crucifix swinging free as I fired at the man who had drawn first. The detective's shotgun roared, the blast echoing through the rafters. Shouts in Italian and English mixed into a single desperate chorus. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, lit in flashes by muzzle fire. In moments the meeting was no longer about power, it was about survival. When the smoke thinned, only a handful were still breathing. The lieutenant with the scar lay slumped over the table, eyes glassy. The confidant stepped forward, weapon lowered, scanning the bodies for movement. The detective leaned against the doorframe, reloading with slow, deliberate hands. I walked to the center of the room, my boots crunching over spent shells. The documents were still there, stained now with blood and ash. I looked at the surviving men, their faces pale. This ends here, I said, my voice flat. None argued. Somewhere outside, the tide surged louder, as if to claim the dead. Dawn broke over the pier in a smear of pale gold. I walked alone to the water's edge, the crucifix cold in my hand. Behind me, the city stretched awake, already hungry for the next name to rise and fall. I didn't know if I had saved anything worth saving, only that the men who had killed Tommy were gone. The confidant's voice carried faint on the wind. Where will you go now? I didn't answer. Some questions deserve silence. I tossed the crucifix into the water and watched it sink, swallowed by the tide. In this city, oaths break, families burn, and power changes hands. The only oath that matters is the one you take with yourself.